Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Regional Housing Council meeting of Wednesday, May 8th, 2024. The time is 4:01. We're going to go ahead and get started. First thing first, as always, why don't we go ahead and do quick introductions around the room and roundtable style. I'll start. My name is Michael Althauser. I am a Tumwater City Council member here on the IHC as the chair. Why don't we go around the table and then go into Zoom land?
Danny Madron with the Olympia City Council.
Ryan Andrews, Planning Manager with the City of Lacey.
Hi, Jennifer Adams, Housing Coordinator, City of Lacey.
Darian Lightfoot, Director of Housing Homeless Response, City of Olympia.
Jacinta Stelches, Affordable Housing Progress Manager, City of Olympia. Alex First, Thurston County Affordable Housing Program Manager. Thea Tangerman, Affordable Housing Program Assistant.
And in Zoom land, the first person I see is you, Council Member Cox. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick? Oh, you're on mute, Carolyn.
Carolyn Cox, Lacey City Council member and lead rep to the RHC.
Great. Councilmember Kathy.
Joan Cathy, Tumwater City Council.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
Robert Vanderpool, City of Olympia, alternate.
Alan Hershey.
Alan Hershey, executive aide for Commissioner Klaus. She is on vacation right now, so Commissioner Mejia is the substitute. Thanks, Carolina.
Speaking of which, Commissioner Mejia.
Hi, Carolina Mejia, alternate for Thurston County, and having a nice little background music here for Moana as well.
Well, we can't hear it, but I wish we could. Brad?
Brad Medard, Planning Manager, City of Tumwater.
Let's see, Gary.
Hi, everybody. Gary Cooper, Planning and Building Manager for City of Yelm.
And Erica.
Hello, my name is Erica Smith Erickson. I am the Housing and Land Use Planner for the City of Tumwater.
Great. Kaven.
Good evening. Kaven Hill, they, them, Homeless Services Advisory Board Co-Chair.
Thanks for being here. Keely.
Hi there, Keely Marino, Thurston County Homeless Response Program Manager, and I will be on camera in just a moment.
No problem. And Rob.
Good afternoon, Rob Gilder, Assistant County Manager for Thurston County.
Great. I think that's everybody. So we can go ahead and move into our agenda. Our first item is reviewing the agenda and our meeting purpose. Are there any changes to the agenda we're aware about? I don't have a change to the agenda, but just as a heads up and to hold myself accountable to make sure I don't forget later, I do want to have a brief conversation about the council's interest in maybe doing a retreat or some strategic planning later in the year, maybe in the fall. So that's something we can pin for later to talk about a bit. But with nothing else, our first action item is approval of the minutes from our May 8th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Madrone and seconded by Commissioner Mejia. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to the public comment portion of our meeting. Has anyone signed up since 10 minutes ago?
No public comment.
All right, no one is registered for public comment. So we're just trucking along. That brings us to our more substantive portion of the agenda. The vital housing funding recommendation is our first action. And Alice and Jacinta, I think you'll Alex and Jacinta. Sorry.
Yes. Do we need to approve this before?
We did
that.
We did. Oh.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry.
It was very fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
And timeouts. So here we go. Yes, vital housing. I'm going to take the lead on this one. So background on this item, Vital Housing responded to Thurston County's request for proposals for affordable housing capital projects in April with a funding request of $2,750,000. The advisory board reviewed and scored their application, and they recommended funding Vital Housing Sportside Apartment Acquisition and Preservation Project contingent upon Vital Housing providing additional information, which is identified and requested by the advisory board, and upon Thurston County learning of our final home investment partnership program award amount. So then the advisory board received this information, Vital Housing responded with the information and documents requested, and we distributed that to the advisory board on June 11th for review. The advisory board then met last Thursday, June 20th, to discuss, and they unanimously approved the motion to fund the Vital Housing Portside Apartment project at the amount of $1,357,699.15, which is the remaining amount that was available under the RFP after the other additional funding awards that were recommended at the last RHC meeting. So this amount was adjusted because since that last meeting and that recommendation, Thurston County received our final home award amount from HUD, and we also added in the program income. So we had a little bit more than we had originally anticipated. So Vital Housing's proposal is to acquire and preserve 112 units of affordable housing at the Portside Apartments in Olympia. The organization also plans to update units to achieve more energy efficiency. The apartments are currently rent restricted due to tax credit financing, and that period will expire in 2026. So Vital Housing's plan is to purchase and preserve these affordable housing units so that the current owner will not seek to sell the apartment at market rate. So our proposed recommendation today is for the RHC to recommend to approve the funding recommendation from the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and recommend approval by the Board of County Commissioners. Any questions?
Does anyone have any questions in the room or online? Not seeing any. This is pretty straightforward carryover from last time. We all got the Q&A that was provided, and I think their responses were really thorough. So I see why the advisory board was satisfied with the responses they received. There are no other questions. The chair, so awkward at this. I would entertain a motion to approve the funding of Vital Housing Portside Apartments proposal as presented.
So moved.
Let me revise that to the actual written recommendation. Recommend to approve the funding recommendation from the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and recommend approval by the County Board of Commissioners. If moved.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Matrone, seconded by Councilmember Cox. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Great, thank you. Moving right along to the RFI pipeline recommendations, and Alex and Jacinda. Sorry, I think you're gonna help us with this one again. Well,
Sure. I'm actually going to start us off.
and start us off. Great.
Sorry, I was a little bit late. I'm Elisa Sparkman, Communications Specialist to the RHC and county staff. So I put together this document that explains what the Affordable Housing Capital Pipeline is. And so I'm just going to kind of describe that, share that information before we jump into the request for information. So earlier this year, the county released a request for information to give the opportunity for organizations to add their affordable housing capital projects to what we call the pipeline. And the pipeline is basically a schedule of affordable housing capital projects, and it's for the next 3 years. So this request was for 25, 26, 27, correct? Sure, got that right. Okay. And so if you look on the document, it has a little flow chart that explains the process for the request for information. And so that's what we're looking at on the screen. This is kind of after this year's RFI, the next year's RFI will be just for the third year. So we'll be populating the schedule for 2028 next year, and we'll still have 26 and 27 on the schedule. So the RFI, request for information process, The Thurston Affordable Housing Advisory Board reviews the applications and then makes recommendations to the RHC. And that's what is happening today. And then once these recommendations are approved, the projects will be added to the pipeline. At this point, the projects getting on this pipeline schedule does not have to go in front of the county commissioners, because each year, these organizations who are on this schedule or on the pipeline will still have to apply for the funds that they're scheduled for. So basically, this is more of a commitment to allow these organizations to plan for their projects a little bit more thoroughly and have that commitment. So they'll get a letter of commitment when they're on the pipeline, and then they're expected to apply for the funding the year that they're scheduled. And if, as long as everything's in order with their application and everything looks good and things haven't changed and they're ready, they'll likely get the funding, because that's kind of what the process is. But it's not 100% guaranteed, but it is considered, a commitment that we're making. So I also have the RFP process on this as well. So you want to scroll down a little bit, Leah? Thank you. So then we have the RFP process, which is more like what we've done with the other regular funding stuff, like we did at the last meeting, where RHC will approve the recommendations from the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and then it will go to the commissioners for final approval. Any questions?
Anyone have questions about kind of the process of the pipeline? We'll get to, I think, the specific recommendations and things in a moment, but specifically about the process. Does anyone else have questions about it? I would probably have a dozen questions right now, except we talked about it on Friday, and so most of mine are answered. I don't see any hands or any questions in the room, so I think we can, with that sort of a base level knowledge, I think we can move into the 24, 25, 26.
Lisa.
25, 26, 27. Correct.
Yes. So I will try not to duplicate some of the information Elisa shared. Excuse me, sorry, I'm making sure I'm projecting my voice here. So again, the pipeline is intended to be a tool for all of us, staff, the community, and developers, to know kind of what projects are upcoming, what type of projects, what kind of populations are serving, what area median income levels. So what Aaliyah is showing on the screen is a summary, the very detailed summary of all of the proposals, which is also in the packet. But this is where a little bit more information lives, and hidden behind everyone's lovely face on the right, I think, is a column for the scores as well. So again, the applicants this year, the RFI typically happens every year, is typically released by the county at the same time that the request for proposals is released, and it will typically populate the pipeline for 3 years ahead. This year was different because the county had not issued an RFI in a few years due to COVID, and there was a lot of shifting within the pipeline that was existing during COVID, so the county just kind of paused. And we are now picking it back up. So that's why you all are seeing 3 years worth of projects today. Next year, we will be coming back to you all with just projects for the pipeline for 2028. So again, we will have recommendations from the Thurston Affordable Housing Advisory Board for 2025, 2026, and 2027. Earlier this year, the board recommended, and this council approved, setting aside 60% of estimated funds in any given year for the RFI.
And then the remaining 40% is set aside for the RFP and the opportunity fund. So the majority of our funding kind of going forward is dedicated, though, as Elisa said, a kind of a soft commitment to pipeline projects. So again, the RFI was issued in February by the county. It essentially is making available or projecting to be available about $3,588,000 annually. Again, that number could change because that is a projection. Our funds are based off of our total funding from HUD, document recording fees, sales and use tax. So this is very much a projection, an educated estimated projection. But the board did choose to kind of allocate dollar for dollar what is expected to be received annually. So I'm going to go through 2025 first and kind of maybe pause and take questions if there are any. Leah has 2025 is this kind of orangish red color, and then we'll move on to 2026 in the blue, and then we'll move on to 2027 in a mustard kind of color. So again, we're working with about $3,588,000 annually. 2025 did have the most requests. Overall, there were 11 proposals asking for just under 24 million. And again, given those projections, we anticipate there'll be almost 11 million available. So overprescribed for sure. 2025 was the year that had the most competition. There were 5 projects that, there were 5 projects that identified 2025 as being the year that they preferred funding. So the RFI asked applicants to identify if they preferred one of those 3 years, if they were kind of okay with any of the years, or, give us a little bit information about what other funding sources you're seeking, and what year would be best for you to be placed onto the pipeline. So in the staff report here, the projects are also organized by highest score that the board gave. That's an average score from our board. So you won't see the score here, but they are up here. So as listed, the board chose to the best of their ability, fully fund projects that scored the highest. Other things that were taken into consideration were if there were other projects already on the pipeline or also competing in this process that needed some of the same limited resources, such as housing vouchers or state funding. And then for 2025, the board is recommending to fund at the full request of Ponza Coyote's Lacey Village at $1 million. Habitat for Humanity, I will jump back into or loop back around and explain that one a little bit more. Homes First, Hayes ADUs at their full request of $300,000. I will also explain the Salvation Army, which requested $3,165,000. The funding recommendation for 2025 is not to fund them. I will come back to that, and you'll see that in later years as well. And then last, Homes First, the development of affordable housing. Essentially, the board chose to kind of give them what was left or anticipated to be left in that year, which is $160,000 of their $500,000 request. Salvation Army, I will speak to next. You'll see them pop up in recommendations for 26 and 27. This is a project that they are still working on identifying land that's going to work for the project. And they did let the board know that they will need housing vouchers, and they will also need to pursue some state funding. So for that reason, the board thought it was most appropriate to fund them in later years so that we weren't setting ourselves up for projects already on the pipeline to be competing against each other in those processes. Specifically, the Lehigh Franz Anderson project and or the TWG Interfaith Works 303 Franklin project, which are already on the pipeline. So this, by no means is the board saying this isn't a valuable project. They liked it. It scored fairly well. Just a resources kind of scenario there. So again, I'll touch on that one in the next 2 years. And then Habitat came in. This is for the 3900 Boulevard project. A very large home ownership project, and they requested 150,000 per home. So 150,000 for that 112 homes, which is about 16.8 million. Obviously much more than we have. So the board decided to take that 16.8, especially since Habitat communicated they would take funding in any and all years and split it into 3. So if you split that into 3 for each year, that's about 5.6 million a year. So that's why you see in the staff report this 5.6. So in the 2025, the board is recommending funding that project at 2,128,000. Which again is not their full request, but a good majority of it and left amount of funding for the other proposals. Any?
I have a question. So in reading the descriptions of the projects, it seems like if some of them didn't get full funding, that they would still be able to accomplish them. Like to any degree, are there any projects where if they didn't get full funding, that means they couldn't do the project at all? It seems like most of the projects are scalable and they'll have access to grants to supplement.
As far as we are aware, that is the case. No one communicated like a minimum ask.
Okay.
And again, so these are placed in, as Elisa explained, they're placed onto the pipeline, which means when that year, so when next year rolls around, February, and we'll release the RFP. These projects, if you all fund them, will be applying to the RFP to confirm that they're still ready, they're still moving forward. And for some reason, there's nothing, I guess, precluding them if they like wanted to respond to that as well. Much smaller amount, only 20% of the annual funding. But yeah, none of them, to our knowledge, none of them like couldn't go forward if they didn't get their full funding amount.
Any other questions from folks so far? Great.
Here, let me come on. All right, and then Lee, if you could scroll down to the blue. Right on the screen. So 2026, again, we took Habitat's full request. Another third of it was considered in 2026. And then Salvation Army, even though they identified 2025 as their preferred year of funding, they would also consider 26 or 27. So this is why we're seeing Salvation Army and Habitat in this lineup as well. In this case, Habitat and Salvation Army, their average scores were highest among everyone that applied for 2026. So that's why you see them at the top of this list. Still big requests, so we're still not getting to their full requests in 2026, but the board recommended 1,500,000 for Habitat's Boulevard project, 1,158,000 for Salvation Army Silvercrest, and then rounding out the rest of the recommendations, 180,000 for the Housing Land Trust, 500,000 for Homes First, and another 250,000 for a second Homes First project. That 250,000, as we saw in 2025, the remainder, the balance of what kind of left over after these other ones were funded. And then you'll notice that behavioral health resources, the board has recommended not funding them. And this is also not because they had any issue with the project itself, but this is a phase 2. So this project was recommended for phase 1 funding and the RFP this year. Phase 2, their application was fairly incomplete. There was a lot of questions that were just left as to be determined, including their funding ask. So the board had a really hard time trying to figure out like how much to potentially fund them or not fund them without an ask and knowing like what it would go toward. So they kind of settled on having, assuming you all approve the recommendations, having staff follow up with them and encourage them to apply for the RFP in that year. And hopefully they will have more information, including specific dollar ask that could be considered through the request for proposals. And I will pause for any questions on 26 as well.
Any questions? Anyone online have any questions? Yes. It's the one. Okay, I don't see any hands.
All right, and then our last year that was considered was 2027. This one had even fewer applications. So again, we Homes First identified 2027 as their kind of like specified year for these two projects. And then again, we're seeing Habitat and Salvation Army at the top of the list, trying to get as close to their full ask as possible. So Habitat, again, with a recommendation for 1 million, just a little over 1,500,000. Salvation Army, a little over 1 million. And then Homes First rounding out the remainder of those recommendations at 500,000 each for scattered site development. So across 25, 26, and 27, Salvation Army and Habitat for Humanity are getting funding. We're still not quite able to get to their full asks by getting them as close as we can without kind of completely eliminating another project. 2027 questions.
Anyone have any questions about anything so far on this item?
Then I wanted, before we get to
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you, my question was in regards to Home First, and I don't know if it's appropriate to ask, but or if the information is here, but I see that the use of the funds is in acquiring properties, existing properties. Is there already a proposed plan on how they plan to acquire those properties, like through asset forfeiture or auctions or anything like that?
Yeah, Kevin, they didn't within the application, they didn't list specific like addresses per se that they were looking at. But it is typically Homes First practice to be working with homeowners that are supporting their organization. And it seemed like someone on our board had did something to our knowledge. They are working with some homeowners that have communicated they're willing or interested in selling to Homes First, but like specific addresses weren't necessarily listed in or identified in the application, or like a specific like acquisition plan, I guess. That said, the county, has worked with Homes First quite significantly on the same kind of model with these same funds. And so there is a comfort level there in knowing that like in the past, they have been able to spend those funds and spend them timely and identify properties to acquire that meet the funding requirements and they're aligned with their application.
Excellent, thank you. I'll do some additional research so I can educate myself.
When Tumwater has worked with them with our CDBG funds, we sort of bookmarked funding for them without an exact property in mind. And then they essentially were looking in the market for properties that were vacant, usually pretty rundown properties that they could get for a good deal and then rehabilitate and put equity into it by making it a nicer, livable home that they could then utilize for their mission. So when we've done it in the past, we haven't specified properties, and that's been pretty successful. The thing that makes me more comfortable about it being a couple years out is that does give them time to then find those properties too. Carolyn, give your hand raise.
Yes, and I will add to Michael's comment, Lacey has also had successful dealings with Homes First. And they have proved to be not only good at finding and rehabilitating housing, but in managing housing so that it stays habitable and they are good neighbors in their neighborhoods. So I really basically wanted to compliment the committee, having gone through pipeline applications for a number of years. I thought you all had a very thoughtful and intelligent approach to this. So I just want to say, yay, great work. Thanks.
Well put, Carolyn. Any other comments or questions online or in the room before we take action?
Michael, before we take action,
Yes.
I don't think I included it in here, but wanted to kind of build off of Elisa's flow chart and let people know. So proposals or applications, projects that are placed onto the pipeline, Alex and the county team will be reaching out kind of annually, checking on those because we're building it out a few years. So staff is reaching out to make sure each year, like these are still viable projects. They're still kind of on track. They're still gonna expect to need funding in the given year that they're on the pipeline. And then there's always a possibility, that things may happen and a project that is on the pipeline now may fall off, something might happen. They might not be able to complete the project, or they might need to push it back a year, which has happened before in our pipeline. So there is an opportunity in terms of switching spots if there's another project that's on the pipeline that also isn't ready to go. If they fall out, that doesn't, for a given year that they're placed onto the pipeline, that doesn't prevent them from responding to an RFP in whatever year works for them. So the pipeline is really a preliminary commitment, but it is still preliminary. It's, we're confident these projects are moving forward, but things could happen. So we could still see stuff fall out. If a project were not able to move forward or not respond to the RFP in that given year, then our board would consider, is that amount of funding that we thought would be available or held for that project, does our board then want to recommend to you all to kind of split whatever that was earmarked or set aside for that project among the remaining projects that are in the pipeline for that year, or put it into the RFP so there's more funding in the RFP. So that, is something that could kind of come up in the future and kind of more decisions around it. But if a project falls out, but I guess just letting people know there is a little bit of shifting that could still happen.
And by our board, you mean the Affordable Housing Advisory?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board would make a recommendation to you all in terms of if they wanted to split it among the remaining projects, or recommend putting whatever was kind of dedicated to that project into the request for proposals process and make more available for that process, or the opportunity fund for that.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any hands online. If there aren't any other questions, I think we'd entertain a motion to approve the 2025, 2026, and 2027 affordable housing capital pipeline placements and approximate funding recommendations as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Cox, seconded by Councilmember Madrone. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. That brings us next to the Affordable Housing Incentives Crosswalk.
Great. Would it be helpful to you all to like have a visual of?
I mean, I've got it here, but.
Yeah, okay. While Leah pulls that up, this it's kind of a lot here. Want to thank Jennifer and Erica for help with the staff report. And then also Jennifer and Ryan, Brad and Erica for help, and Tom and Alex for help with putting this kind of table together. So lots of background information here. This is an item that overlaps with a lot of things that the Regional Housing Council kind of has in their purview or has been concerned or is concerned with, including our comp plan mandates, House Bill 1220, and how units are kind of split up there and how we get to number of units, our goal units per jurisdiction, as well as our housing action plans, Lacey, Tumwater, Olympia, and now Yelm have housing action plans. And then also alignment with the assessment of fair housing. So just to speak just very briefly about each of those things and how this comes together, and then we'll look at what I'm talking about and kind of explain what that is. So, individually, our jurisdictions are working on our comprehensive plans and trying to identify the number of housing units we're kind of all aiming at, new units that are projected to be needed by 2045. We had a lovely, Regional Housing Council had a lovely presentation by Thurston Regional Planning Council in December, I think. So housing incentives speaks to that. This is a way to encourage housing, encourage more units. Additionally, the work plan, I think it was for this year, had staff looking at our housing action plans, and we brought that kind of crosswalk to you all. And we looked at parts of the housing action plans that we kind of y'all wanted to elevate and work on together regionally. And one of those things was education and outreach around some of the housing programs that each jurisdiction offers. Another thing that was kind of talked about in that conversation was having some sort of like affordable housing toolkit or something where developers or the public could kind of easily see what is offered in each jurisdiction, and it would help kind of guide them in, maybe deciding if they wanted to develop in one place versus another, or what might apply to one property in one jurisdiction versus another. And then last, Krista Linson in our office with City of Olympia worked with the county and the housing authority last year to put together the assessment of fair housing. And that document, she worked on identifying some goals for the region, and starting, I think it'll be next year, we'll be kind of held accountable to reporting progress on those goals. So this is also alignment with the fair housing assessment and some of those goals in that assessment, and working toward like knowing that we're going to start reporting on all that stuff soon. So the incentive document itself, essentially like staff from each jurisdiction looked at what incentives do we each have. And it's laid out here on the left, kind of, common incentives like the multifamily tax exemption, and then it's broken down by jurisdiction. with a brief description of how that program works in that jurisdiction. You know, a lot of us have the same programs, but they're operated just slightly different. And then just a little bit more information on, you know, like what a developer would, how they would need to be eligible or what they would need to do to be eligible for this program, as well as who to contact if they were interested in taking advantage of it or learning more. And then I think for the most part, we've linked also our individual code so that, you know, it's kind of an easy jump to the code if someone wanted to read our code. So it's a very lengthy document. It's very thorough. You'll see things like the multifamily tax exemption, some impact fee exemptions. We have the lot affordable housing and support connection fee in here right now. Some general facility charges, connections to wastewater, a variety of just kind of incentives that are really intended to help make developing affordable housing more affordable. And I think the question or you know, what we're really hoping to get from you all today is a little bit of feedback on, you know, is there anything else we need to do to this document? Are we missing anything? Does it look fairly complete? And then, you know, visually, is there a way that you all would prefer to see this information instead of kind of this chart? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. And then third, you know, what would you all like us to do with it now that we have it? And Elisa, I think, could probably talk a little bit to that as well, but don't want to make any assumptions about how you all would prefer staff make this available and put it out there to educate the public and developers. So.
Great. I've been talking, I'll let other folks, did folks have questions or comments first to kick us off into providing feedback? If not, I'm happy to start. I don't see any hands, so I'll go ahead. I think this is a really great tool, specifically for the purpose of providing all this information to folks who are going to be the ones deciding, like, what is right for my situation. Let's say I want to develop a duplex somewhere, and that's my objective. This would be an incredibly useful technical document for that purpose. So when I'm thinking about, like, does the chart form make sense? I think that makes all the sense in the world to me, because I would be looking at it from a technical perspective. So a technical document makes a lot of sense. In terms of public consumption and public use, the other thing that comes to mind to me is, like, not this document, this has an explicit purpose, but another useful type of document would be like a version of this for a tenant, so that they could be aware of the different policies that exist in different jurisdictions. Like Olympia has more protections than Tumwater does. I'm not sure where Lacey falls on that scale either. But they're all different across jurisdictional lines, I think. And we did create something a couple years ago that was a compare and contrast that Brad, you helped put together a few years ago while we were examining what tenant protection actions we should take, that looked at other municipalities for ideas too. So I think that could be a cool thing. But
Yeah, it's on our work plan, our tech team's work plan to do that after this is finished.
Okay.
So we first started with affordable housing development incentives, looking to figure out a mechanism to do that, and then to see what we would be the takeaways, and then to sort of refine it and do the same thing for tenant protections and to bring it back in this format and figure out how we could do some more cross-jurisdictional policy. But yes, that is on our work plan to do right after we're finished with this.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
The other thing that really comes to mind is just, like, I think just as a general matter, to see how different these are across the jurisdictions really just sort of speaks to kind of the lack of coherent policy crossing jurisdictional lines, just on like a fundamental basis that we all literally have different impact fee regulations. And we all literally have different MFTE programs. We all have different zoning programs and all sorts of things. Like, I think it sort of speaks to the need at a regional level for us to try to, as our own municipalities, maybe coordinate these things. And we don't really have a forum to talk about that in its current form, which I think is like a prelude to talking about strategic planning and a retreat to see if this could be a body that maybe is a forum for those conversations where we can come up with model policy for jurisdictions to consider or make recommendations as to policy coordination across jurisdictional lines. That goes, I think, above and beyond your questions, Jacinda. But I do think that that's a comment worth having, and I think this is really a good example of how beneficial that could be when you have 25 different policies across 3 jurisdictions when we're all trying to swim up the same stream and all battling like the same current, basically. But that's me on the soapbox. Do other folks have questions or comments? Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, I have a soapbox too. Just kidding. One thing that I noticed, like looking through this, is some of these things are incentives for affordable housing, and some of them are things to address supply and the overall affordability of housing. So that's just one thing that I noticed, and it might be important to tease those things apart, or just naming it appropriately, that it's both affordable housing and also just getting the housing we need built in our community. And I just confirmed with Ryan over here, I was looking at Lacey's 8-year tax exemption with an affordability requirement, and it looks like that's not correct. Yeah. So just generally looking over it and just confirming things. That was just the first thing on the list. So it's like, whoa, really? All right. And then I also, like, you know, in terms of just thoroughness, I was looking at the parking incentives area for Olympia, and it notes areas like, you know, the downtown area is exempt from residential parking requirements within a half mile of frequent transit. It's also the Capitol Mall Triangle, the whole area there. And then in the rest of the city, we've reduced the requirement at all down to 0.5 parking spaces per unit. So just in terms of capturing all of that. Oh, and then one thing that I heard in our recent land use and environment committee meeting for the Olympia City Council, the pre-approved ADU building plans, I understand, are actually having to be updated to reflect the new building codes. And so I don't know if that needs to be reflected here, but it was just something I learned recently, is like the current pre-approved plans we have are no longer approved, and they need to be updated and reapproved. So just something, I'm mostly noting that for everybody's awareness, because it was new information for me. But, you know, that also, you know, in terms of like that's an example of a policy in here that's not necessarily about affordable housing, you know, capital A affordability, but addressing capital A affordable, but addressing overall affordability. And then if we have that in there, then do we start talking about like middle housing and the other things? It can get unwieldy really fast because we're all doing so much. But overall, it's really cool to see all of this like side by side and see all the work that the jurisdictions are taking on. I love the idea of doing some kind of strategic retreat as a group. Maybe a half day, maybe a full day, depends on how much oomph we want to give it. But I think it would be worth it to have some dedicated time for us to dig into this and be able to provide really clear direction in terms of like how we want to, as a multi-jurisdictional body here, support each other, align with each other. You know, what ways will that work? What ways will it be challenging? And just really dig into that.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Mejia?
Thank you. And just hearing everyone's comments, right? I feel like in terms of the county, you know, our hands are really tied with the GMA. And so, you know, for us, you know, our best way of cooperation is really aligning our codes and ordinances, right? As we're going through these comprehensive plans and being sure that those are going through each of the cities and the counties. UGA plans are amended as such, and I know that that's currently what we're working on. So I appreciate the side to side, but you know, when it comes to a lot of these proposals, when it comes to outside the urban growth area, the county really has a lot of restrictions.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this document? Not seeing any from folks online. Well, I in terms of guidance on final form, I think it makes sense to just make sure that each of our staffs kind of gives it another once over to make sure we kept dot the i's and cross the t's, like you mentioned, Danny. And then in terms of public consumption, I guess I'm not sure in what way it would be most helpful. But like we kind of know who some of the big developers are that we work with regularly. And so Brad, I'm wondering if it makes sense in like, we have regular stakeholder meetings with potential developers to just sort of word of mouth, I think is probably a pretty powerful way to make this document known. If there's folks out there who do work in the development community, I mean, they work with all three of our cities pretty regularly, but I guess I'm sort of looking for maybe technical ideas for how to make them aware of this, since I'm not the one who generally interacts with the stakeholders. Go ahead, Elisa.
In terms of, well, I'm not quite sure about making them aware of this, but the original thought was that we would have a web page. So I'm planning on kind of reaching out to the other communications staff around the different jurisdictions to kind of get their input and also look at what our capabilities are on the web platform that the RHC website is on. And I did, like, initially my thought is that it would be drop down menus based on jurisdiction, and then also have this full spreadsheet that's by type of exemption available too. So there would be two different ways of being able to view it, by whatever jurisdiction you're building in, but also by the way that this is formatted, so that you can look at by exemption or by policy.
Might also be interesting if you could choose by jurisdiction and then see what comes up. This would probably require a greater level of analysis. But if I was a developer and I was like, I want to develop a 5-plex, or I really want to develop like a apartment building, if you could choose it by type, that might also be a helpful tool if I was a developer to then see, well, where I know what I want to do, and maybe the question is, where should I do it at? Rather than I know where I want to go, what can I build there?
And maybe that's something we can ask developers is when you're, where would you start from? And maybe we can kind of go from there too.
Yeah, we actually already have a toolkit posted to our website for Olympia that outlines all of our affordable housing incentives. Thank you to staff for putting that together. So, you know, that's something that we have posted on the Olympia website. And I was going to mention like what you did, like if I'm like a developer that wants to build 100 apartments, like I don't need information about pre-approved ADU designs. Like being able to sort by housing type, I think would be really cool. And, you know, another potential way to bring more public awareness to this that would help bring like all the elected officials up to speed is if each of us brought this back to our jurisdictions when it's complete and do a study session with our colleagues, you know, so Olympia City Council, Tumwater, Lacey, Yelm, the county, and all sit down and say, and just kind of get a sense of the lay of the land. And that will also help us as the RHC, you know, as we delve into like, you know, how do we want to move forward on shaping regional policy together? Like, you know, we're not kind of doing it in a vacuum without the awareness of our colleagues who are ultimately going to be making these decisions with us, just, you know, and it, you know, just outside of the RHC.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Brad?
Yeah, so thank you. I just want to let the RHC know that for the city of Tumwater, we are currently in the middle of revising all of our development regulations to respond both to the state requirements for middle housing and all the other 10 or 12 bills they passed in the past 2 years. That means a couple things, I think, in terms of the document that we presented to the RHC. Number one, I think it's going to be outdated very quickly. We're going to definitely be aiming to adopt all these changes by the end of next year, and there's going to be some very substantial changes to what we're proposing in there. The other thing I just want to make you aware of is that we're also having ongoing conversations, obviously, with our housing providers. We've identified a number of different stakeholders as part of the process of doing all this work. And we can definitely talk through, and that's actually one of the specific questions we've asked them. What other things can we be doing to help you? So my caution is we're kind of in the middle of this process right now, in very deep, and I'm really reluctant to sort of put this out here. This is what we're going to do, and then change it all very quickly in the near future.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brad. We're actually, I think, probably all in the middle of updating our middle housing regulations to respond to different bills in the legislature. And I'm really curious about the stakeholder input that you're getting. We just had a conversation on our land use committee recently regarding, updating the middle housing regulations, ADU regulations, but what else we might need to do that's not necessarily required of us, and talked about pulling together some stakeholders to help give us some advice on what they need. So I think it might be a good opportunity for us to collaborate as jurisdictions. If you're already doing that work, we were just talking about it, like and we know that further work is needed outside of just the realm of middle housing in terms of our development codes to help make it easier to build affordable housing. So, maybe that can be a tech team conversation so that we are not, all reaching out to the same stakeholders, asking the same questions, and we can kind of do that together.
Makes sense. Carolyn?
Hi, I think Brad and Danny both make good points, and I would like to see baked into this document a plan for a periodic review and update so that it's on a predictable cycle. And I think the tech team can probably advise on, what that time frame ought to be, like annually or every 2 or 3 years, or, however the rhythms of that go, so that we get a refresh and it becomes a living document.
We can also have a disclaimer on there that says that jurisdictions are working on updating a number of these policies, like in the housing or in the zoning incentives one for us, we could have an asterisk that says that it does make sense that if we want to have something available before we do that, that there should be something that memorializes what's available today, because that's what developers are looking at now when they're contemplating building now, is that those things are literally our status quo, even if they will be changing.
We talked about that too, having a column that talks about like in progress or in review. And so if two jurisdictions do find this helpful and we're starting to better collaborate on policy, and one is starting to pick up something in here, then there's a column that's like, we're working on this to kind of flag developers that's like things may be changing in this category. And that could help during the review too. Like Carolyn said, we could show who's working on what, who's trying to press things forward, and just kind of give us a workload lay of the land too, to show how useful the tool's been.
That'd be great. Any other questions on this or comments? We don't have an action item associated with this, correct, in terms of a motion or voting on anything?
I think it would just be helpful to know. I heard, a once over for accuracy, maybe adding some notes about things that might be changing soon. Just to know, like, if you all want us to kind of do more updates and bring it back again, or if that's what the
Yeah, I think updating it maybe with the column on what is sort of on the horizon, that because we're all actively working on those updates now. I think we probably have a good sense of what is or isn't on the horizon for the jurisdictions. So an update, and then maybe we can look at it and finalize in July.
Think that this is a first kind of swing around RHC doing policy work.
Yeah.
And so we're wanting to keep momentum around it, but like, what does that look like? How do we take this document where we now know there's areas we can all be really helpful to one another and then make that come to fruition? So if there is like a clear ask, or if we're seeing this sort of half-day strategic planning retreat, try to dive into that, then we can formulate that in that way. Or if there's other direction on how we can really start to do some cross-jurisdictional policy from the electeds here, then that would be helpful.
Yeah. I was planning on talking about like the possibility of a retreat and good of the order, but I think maybe we can call an audible and maybe talk about that now, because it sort of feels like a natural segue, and then get to the communications update after that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
No disrespect to the communications update intended.
We've got time.
Great. So this sort of feels like a segue. I think, so the last time we had a retreat where we did some planning, I think one of the primary goals of that was the question of how do we incorporate subject matter expertise into our processes, because we were making a lot of decisions in a vacuum. And that sort of led to some of the creation, or maybe the momentum behind the creation of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and the Homeless Services Advisory Board. And I think that was like, I certainly see that the process we went through for that is incredibly valuable, because it led to the creation of that and really created the will to get those boards online. And they've been incredibly successful in making very thoughtful recommendations to us that we've pretty much approved unanimously, which I think speaks really a great deal to their work and effort, and also the value of putting subject matter expertise first and foremost in the process. And that sort of, I think, looking at that process and how valuable it was to have a retreat where we talked about that at length, kind of leads me to think that, there's more that this entity could do in terms of aligning policies across jurisdictions. Some of the other conversations we've had since this board came together was like, do we think it should be a more substantive standalone committee? Should it have more full-time or dedicated staff? Those are conversations we've just sort of flirted with in the past and haven't revisited in a while. So I think it would be helpful for us to have a strategic retreat, strategic planning session, maybe half day or full day in the fall or early winter, sometime where we have enough time to thoughtfully plan and hire a facilitator to help us with that. So I'm interested in hearing, what do council members think about that idea? What do staff and the technical team think about that idea? And just want to open up the floor to the thought about doing a strategic planning session. Carolina?
Yes. So I absolutely think that this is really needed. I think just honestly, I would even recommend maybe splitting it up in between 2 half days, one in regards to policy and the other of kind of the future of the RHC, the makeup, the staffing, all of those operational aspects of it. And sometimes if it's a full day, usually people end up kind of being worn out if the heavier discussion takes place first. So my recommendation would be 2 half days if people are available instead of a full day. But I think it really is sorely needed, especially as we're navigating into this policy aspect of the RHC and kind of what that looks like. And I think just really lining things up is needed, and having those goals set and being able to communicate that with all the different jurisdictions through a plan, because some of the feedback we hear or I've heard in different aspects and different meetings with different jurisdictional partners is I wish the RHC would do this or would do that. And so I think just lining out a work plan, and we did that this year, but in terms of policy and sending that to all the jurisdictions in a one pager would be helpful, I think.
Thank you. Carolyn?
Well, I really like what Carolina just said about 2 half days and on different topics. And in terms of the one on the future of RHC, I really think we need to put some thought and hopefully not too far distant action into converting the RHC into its own body with its own staff. And that had been a goal, from early days in this. And I think we are fast approaching the time when it's going to be necessary to do that. So I think the retreat would be the perfect place to talk about what that could look like and how we can start building steps toward making that a reality.
Thank you. Other folks have thoughts, ideas, feedback? Anyone? Oh, Keely.
Hi there. So the Homeless Services Advisory Board we already have a retreat planned for August 23rd, where we're going to be going through just some structural, some infrastructure stuff around the RFP process and a number of things. So I would just want to make a plug for, if there's going to be a retreat, that the Homeless Services Advisory Board and the Affordable Housing Advisory Board members be able to, or at least the chairs and the vice chair and the chair of each of the advisory boards, be included in that conversation. De facto, because they are members of the RHC, but there's just a lot of value in all the voices of those advisory boards, because I would hate to veer off the path of centering the voices of people with lived experience. That's, across every federal guideline and state guideline around addressing specifically homeless response, is that, we're required to do so for the 5-year plan. So I just really want to make sure that we're centering those voices as we move forward and discuss things about policy and how policy is made, especially with regards to best practices that are required of our funding sources.
Yeah, that's great. I agree 100%. Well said.
My other thing to add would be for us to look at early winter, to Carolina's point, that once we do this same process with tenant protections, the county is going to be able to have more of a say in how renters are impacted outside of the county in terms of tenant protections. We get a lot of people that are looking to have the same sort of policies that Olympia has within the county. And so we can only support them and offer guidance. But if the county were to look on how they can incorporate tenant protections within the county, and we could do this same analysis and bring that, because I think that would really add to a more robust policy discussion if we're able to talk about this and tenant protections there.
It's a great idea. Well, I'm hearing mostly openness, positive feedback to organizing a strategic planning session, maybe 2 half days. Not really sure how best to do that, but it sort of seems like the kind of thing that maybe we should have like a subcommittee in charge of sort of planning for that can meet regularly, or I don't know if that's a tech team. Then go ahead.
Well, you mentioned a facilitator.
Yes.
So I'm curious, is there funding for a facilitator that is currently set aside, or is that some kind of decision that would need to be made? And then I think a subcommittee is a good idea, and the way that we've done, because there's only 5 of us that are voting members here. So I know in the past when we've done some kind of subcommittees, there's been alternates that have been included, so we don't reach that quorum. So just mentioning that.
Yeah, I think for the last retreat, the jurisdictions contributed funding. Each jurisdiction did. So that might be a conversation we all have to have with our own jurisdictions for if that's possible.
I might suggest that we add this as an agenda item to your next meeting, that we give us a month as the tech team to kind of talk about some of these logistical issues, so that the electeds don't necessarily have to figure all that out, and then come back to you with maybe some recommendations on, what we can do to fund this, funding of a facilitator, what the format could look like, and get some of those conversations started as staff, and then bring some of those recommendations back to you, so that you're not having to do that on the fly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Do we need to do a motion to direct the tech team for assistance to that effect, or it's,
I don't think so.
okay,
I think we've got some head nods, some thumbs up. Okay, yeah.
awesome. Great. If there's no other comments on this, I think we sort of wrapped up that discussion. Kind of, we can move along to the communications update.
Great, thank you. So just to kind of wrap up the communication stuff that we covered in this meeting, that pipeline document that describes the affordable housing capital pipeline, that's being finalized and will be posted on the website. And the plan is to use that to link to and referring to the pipeline and other documents so that we have kind of a base that explains it. Because just like the word pipeline itself can mean many things. So we'll have that as kind of a resource. And so my other update is part of my work plan has been putting together a Thurston Regional Housing newsletter. And that has been put on hold as the county acquires a new newsletter platform. And the latest update on that is that it's tentatively expected to be ready to go in August or September. And so it looks like we're hoping to have the first issue out in the fall. We were kind of thinking it would be great if we could have it out in the middle of the year in the summer, but the fall is not that much further away. So, and I think having it on the new or the Gov delivery platform, which is kind of one of the industry standards, will be worth it to wait for, as opposed to using another platform for the first issue and then switching over. And then the other update is that on the communications plan, we have it that every the middle of each year, we'll do a review and discussion about the RHC's social media. So right now we don't have our own Regional Housing Council social media accounts. We share social media that's branded with RHC logo, and all of the jurisdictions kind of share it and post it that way. So I'll be presenting kind of what that's looked like over the past 6 months, and just kind of discuss what we want to do going forward and provide kind of some recommendations and see where we're at. So that's what I'll be doing, presenting at the next, the July meeting. And that's everything.
Great.
That's my update.
Thanks. Anyone have any questions? All right, thank you. That brings us to good of the order. I don't think I have anything from our neck of the woods, but do other folks have any good of the order updates to share?
Just about grants pass. I didn't know that's what we're gonna talk about.
Yeah.
I just met with Jay, and he shared that at the 3 cities meetings, there was some energy for us to talk about the grants pass decision, potentially at our HC, to see how we could have some regional alignment about when that decision is made, if it goes either way, what we see as our responsibility, and how we could be a little bit proactive regardless of the decision. So I don't know if that is something that people that were actually at the 3 cities meeting care to talk about, but I knew he planned on attending the next RHC meeting to hopefully hear that discussion and lead us in a way that would make sense when that decision we're supposed to hear in the next couple of weeks about Supreme Court's decision. So I don't know if anyone else at their 3 cities meetings want to share more. I just got a little snippet in passing of hoping that discussion could happen at the RHC. Did anyone else hear about this from their city managers? Okay.
I mean, we'll get it in a couple, in the very least, it feels like we should have it on the agenda as a placeholder for next month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much no matter what it says is probably a good update for us to have on the agenda next month.
Yeah.
So we could, right? Yeah. So we can put a placeholder for that.
Okay.
For sure. Does anyone else have any other good of the order items to share? All right, going once, going twice. Seeing none. All right, well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Our next meeting, Wednesday, July 24th, 4 p.m. on Zoom and here at Lacey City Hall. It will be remote for that. So I won't be in person at that meeting, but that is our next meeting time. So until then, thanks everyone for a super productive meeting. I'm really excited that we approved the pipeline. That's pretty incredible. We've approved $10 million of housing going onto the pipeline. That's at least a few hundred units, according to the counts, with some more scattered sites. So that's incredible work for an hour and 17 minutes. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. We're adjourned.
Thanks. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Right.